The fog sat low over the flea market that morning, heavy enough to mute voices and dull colours into grey. It pressed against the tin roofs and sagging tarps like a lid no one bothered to lift. Cold crept up from the frozen ground and settled into bones. Harbour felt it first in his bad leg. He stood tied to the leg of a folding table with a rope that had lost its softness a long time ago. The knot rubbed the same raw place every time he shifted his weight. He had learned not to pull. Pulling never changed anything. People passed, boots scraped ice, hands shoved into pockets, breath puffed white and disappeared. Each time footsteps came close, Harbour moved forward half a step. Not a full step. Never that. Just enough to be seen. Then he stopped. His body had memorized the distance. A woman walked by with a small boy. The boy slowed, eyes wide, curiosity still unafraid of disappointment. The woman tugged his sleeve hard. "Don't touch it!" Her voice was sharp, protective, embarrassed all at once. They moved on. Harbour's paw stayed where it was, half a step forward, waiting. A man in a canvas jacket stopped long enough to glance down. He took in the matted fur, the cloudy eye, the leg that trembled when Harbour tried to balance. He shook his head once, the way people did when the answer was already decided. Too bad. He kept walking. The rope creaked softly in the wind. Harbour did not look up anymore. He had learned that faces changed faster than feet. He fixed his gaze on the ground instead. The ice there was cracked in thin lines like broken glass. He focused on those lines because they did not move away. The vendor finally noticed someone lingering too long. He did not look at Harbour when he spoke. "It's useless. Can't hunt, can't herd. Vet said the leg's done." His voice carried the flat boredom of a man explaining the weather. Someone laughed nearby. Not at the dog. Just life happening without him. Harbour felt the vibration of it through the rope. Another pair of boots stopped. These ones were slower, careful, the kind that paused as if the person wearing them was listening for something no one else heard. Harbour shifted, half a step forward. The rope tightened. The skin on his neck pulled. He stopped. The boots did not move away. A shadow fell across the ice in front of him. Larger. Still. For a moment, Harbour did not lift his head. He waited for the familiar ending. The sigh, the step back, the sound of leaving. It did not come. Instead, a voice spoke quietly. Not to the vendor, not to anyone in particular. Cold morning. The words were plain. They did not demand anything. Harbour's ear twitched before he could stop it. The man crouched slowly, knees stiff, breath uneven. His face was lined, weathered, the kind that carried years without explanation. He did not reach out. He did not smile. He simply stayed where he was, close enough to matter, far enough not to hurt. Harbour moved his paw again. Half a step. The man noticed. Something passed across his face then. Not pity, not surprise, recognition. The vendor cleared his throat loudly. "You want it? Take it. $5. Free if you're quick. I'm not hauling it back." The man did not answer right away. Harbour felt the pause like a held breath. The man stood. For a second, Harbour thought this was it. Another almost. Another half-step that meant nothing. Then the man reached into his jacket and pulled out a single bill, folded and worn thin. He placed it on the table. "I'll take him." The vendor shrugged. The rope was loosened without ceremony. No goodbye, no warning. The pressure around Harbour's neck vanished. Harbour did not move. The rope fell to the ground with a soft sound, lighter than it should have been. "Come on," the man said, not looking back. Harbour watched his boots turn away. The space between them opened. Cold air rushed in. Trust was not something Harbour had left. It was something he had learned to follow. He waited until the man took 3 steps. Then he moved. Not fast, not steady. The bad leg dragged, shaking, but he kept the rhythm. 1 step, pause, 1 step, half a step forward. The crunch of his paws on frozen gravel sounded too loud to his own ears. The man stopped. He did not turn around. Harbour closed the distance anyway. When the man finally knelt again, it was beside a truck with rust along the seams and a door that groaned when it opened. The man lifted Harbour with careful arms, adjusting without being told where it hurt. Harbour stiffened, then allowed it. Inside the truck, the world smelled different. Old leather, cold metal, something familiar and something safe tangled together. The engine coughed to life. As the truck pulled away, the flea market faded into the fog, its voices swallowed whole. Harbour curled against the door, breathing shallow, watching the road slide past. The man glanced over once. "Looks like it's you and me," he said. Harbour did not lift his head, but his paw shifted. Half a step closer. He was not waiting to be saved. He was waiting for something to end. And for the first time in a long while, it finally felt like it might. Elias Turner had not planned to stay long. The flea market sat at the edge of town like a leftover habit, something people drifted through out of routine rather than hope. Elias moved through it the same way he moved through most places now, quiet, unnoticed. He preferred it that way. He was 58 and carried himself with the careful economy of a man who had learned what pain cost when ignored. His left shoulder ached in the cold. His lungs felt tight, the way they always did when winter pressed down hard. He kept his hands buried in his jacket pockets, fingers brushing the folded list in his head. A radio part. Old model. Military surplus if he was lucky. Something he could solder back to life later while the stove crackled and the cabin stayed warm. That was the plan. He did not come for dogs. He noticed Harbour by accident, or maybe by instinct. Something about the way the market seemed to bend around that corner. Fewer voices, a different silence. Elias slowed without realizing it, the way he used to when a room felt wrong. Then he saw the rope, the leg shaking, the way the dog did not look up. Elias stopped. He told himself it meant nothing. He took in the details the way he always did, quickly and without drama. Injured leg. Malnourished. Old scars that did not belong to a stray who had simply gotten unlucky. The dog did not whine, did not pull, did not ask. That was what caught him. Elias felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not pain. Memory. No, he thought. Not today. He straightened and turned away. Money was tight. Tighter than he liked to admit even to himself. The propane tank needed filling. Groceries would not stretch if he dipped into what little cash he had left. His health was a quiet negotiation every day. He could not afford another responsibility, another life depending on him. And he had grown used to being alone. The cabin did not argue with him. Solitude did not ask for explanations. He walked 3 steps. 4. The cold bit through his boots. Somewhere behind him, the market noise shifted. A laugh, a vendor calling out a price. Elias stopped. He stood there longer than necessary, staring at a table of rusted tools he did not need. Something pulled at him. Not urgency, not guilt, recognition. He turned his head just enough to look back. The dog had moved, only a little, half a step forward, then nothing. Elias felt his jaw tighten. He walked again, this time faster, as if momentum could drown out the thought forming too clearly in his mind. You do not need this. 5 more steps. He stopped again. His breath fogged the air as he exhaled slowly. The market faded around him, replaced by a memory he did not invite. Collapsed concrete. Snow mixed with ash. A man pinned beneath debris, eyes open, body already giving up. That same look, not fear, not hope, waiting. Elias turned fully now. He walked back, each step heavier than the last. He crouched a few feet from the dog, careful not to crowd him. Close enough to see the tremor in the leg, the clouded eye, the discipline in the stillness. Elias spoke before he meant to. "I've seen that look before." The words surprised him. They were not meant for anyone. Not the dog, not the vendor, not the past. He did not explain them. He did not need to. The vendor glanced over, impatient, already done with the transaction before it began. Elias stood. His chest felt tight now, not from the cold. He reached into his pocket and felt the thin edge of folded bills. He thought of the cabin, the quiet nights, the way the radio hummed when it worked just right. He thought of walking away and how easy it would be. Then he looked at the dog again. The dog did not look back. That was what decided it. Elias took the money out, not because he was kind, not because he wanted to be a hero, because he knew what happened when no one stayed, and because whatever that dog was holding inside him, it was not done yet. Elias did not know it then, but as he placed the bill on the table, something old and buried shifted inside him. The dog was waiting for something, and Elias had just stepped into it. The wind picked up without warning. It came down the mountain in sharp bursts, cutting through the gaps between the stalls and slipping under coats like a reminder. Elias felt it press against his chest, the cold working its way into places that never quite healed. He shifted his weight, boots scraping lightly against the frozen gravel. The vendor had already turned back to his table. "If it doesn't go today," he said, voice flat, "I'm dumping it by the canyon." He said it the way someone mentioned trash day. No edge, no threat, just fact. Elias did not look at him right away. He looked at the dog. Harbour stood where the rope had left him, no longer restrained, no longer anchored to anything except habit. The dog did not surge forward, did not retreat. He stood as if waiting for a signal that had not yet been given. Elias reached into his jacket pocket. His fingers brushed the last of the cash he had. Not much, enough for a few days of groceries if he was careful. Enough propane to keep the cabin warm through the next cold snap if he rationed it right. He closed his fingers around the bills and felt the familiar tug of calculation tighten behind his eyes. "You cannot afford this." The wind rattled a loose tarp overhead. Somewhere nearby, metal clanged. The market felt suddenly louder, harsher, less forgiving. The vendor cleared his throat again. $5, he said. "Take it or don't. I'm not keeping it." Elias exhaled slowly through his nose. The cold air burned on the way in. He felt the ache in his ribs flare, old injuries protesting the tension he carried without noticing. He stepped forward. No bargaining, no questions. He unfolded the bill and placed it on the table. "I'll take him." The vendor glanced down, nodded once, and reached for the rope. His hands were quick, practiced. The knot came loose. The rope slid free and dropped to the ground with a dull thud. That was it. No paperwork, no warning, no looking back. Elias waited. Harbour did nothing. No wagging tail, no startled flinch, no sound at all. The dog simply stood there, eyes lowered, body steady in a way that did not belong to a creature newly freed. It was not fear that held him still, it was expectation. Elias straightened and turned away. "Come on," he said quietly. He took a step. Nothing. He took another. Still nothing. For a moment, doubt crept in. Not regret, something quieter, a question without words. Then he heard it. A soft scrape behind him. Uneven. Deliberate. Elias did not turn around. He walked toward the truck, keeping his pace slow, even, the way he used to when moving through unstable ground. Trust could not be rushed. It had to be given space. Behind him Harbour followed. Not eagerly, not confidently. The dog moved as if guided by an invisible line, one that did not pull, only pointed. His gait was off. the injured leg lagging just enough to break the rhythm. But he did not stop. Halfway across the lot, a gust of wind sent a veil of snow skittering across the pavement. Harbour faltered, then continued. By the time they reached the truck, the dog was trembling, not from fear, from effort. Elias opened the passenger door. The hinge groaned. He crouched and slid his arms under Harbour's chest, careful, adjusting without being told where it hurt. Harbour stiffened for a fraction of a second, then let himself be lifted. He was lighter than Elias expected. Too light. Inside the cab, Harbour curled against the door, head tucked low, breathing shallow but steady. Elias climbed in and started the engine. It coughed, then caught, the familiar rattle filling the space between them. He pulled away from the market without looking back. As the road stretched ahead, Elias glanced once toward the passenger seat. Harbour had not moved, but his body was angled just slightly toward Elias now. Not close, just closer. Elias tightened his grip on the steering wheel. This was not pity, he realized. This was something else, something that had already begun, whether either of them was ready for it or not. Night settled over the cabin without ceremony. The last of the daylight drained from the windows, leaving the glass dark and reflective. Elias moved slowly inside, shrugging off his coat, stacking wood by the stove with practiced motions. The cabin smelled of pine, old iron, and cold that had lived there long before he did. Harbour stayed near the door, not curled up, not pacing, just there, as if his body needed to remember where the exit was. Elias noticed but said nothing. He struck a match and coaxed the fire to life. The stove answered with a low crackle, warmth pushing outward inch by inch. It never reached far enough, not on nights like this. The cold always kept a claim. Elias sat down on the edge of the cot and rubbed at his chest. Slow circles, the way he always did when the tightness began to creep in. He told himself it was nothing. Just the altitude. Just the cold. Then his breath caught. It wasn't sudden. It never was. The air felt thinner with each inhale, as if his lungs had forgotten what to do with it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, counting under his breath. In. Out the rhythm slipped. Snow flashed in his mind. Not the kind falling outside the cabin now, but a different white, blown sideways by rotor wash. Sound swallowed by wind. Commands lost in static. His fingers reached automatically towards the shelf. The tin wasn't there. Elias froze. A slow realization settled in, heavier than panic. He had meant to refill the prescription last week. He remembered thinking there was time. There was always time. His breathing shortened. The room seemed to tilt. Outside, the wind rose, scraping along the cabin walls, forcing itself into every crack. The fire snapped sharply, sending sparks up the flue. Elias slid off the cot to one knee, one hand braced against the floor. In his mind, a voice counted again. Calm, measured, in, hold, out. But the rhythm wouldn't hold. Harbour lifted his head. The dog did not bark, did not whine. He stood and crossed the room with a deliberate steadiness that did not match the injury in his leg. He pressed close behind Elias, chest firm against Elias's back, weight careful, intentional. Elias felt it immediately. The warmth, the pressure. Harbour's breathing was fast at first, then slowed. In, out, not forced, offered. The pattern tugged at Elias's memory. Not a command, not a trick. A training cadence meant to anchor someone drifting. Elias followed it without thinking. His shoulders lowered. His breath deepened, shaky, but finding ground. The fire crackled softly. Wind howled through the trees outside, bending them into low, restless groans. Snow tapped against the window like quiet insistence. Man and dog breathed together. Time stretched thin. Elias leaned back slightly, letting Harbour take more of his weight. The dog adjusted without being told, compensating for the bad leg, holding anyway. The tightness eased. Not gone. Never gone. But manageable. When Elias finally opened his eyes, the room felt sharper, steadier. He reached back and rested his hand against Harbour's side. Felt the rise and fall there. Solid. Real. Harbour did not move away. The dog's gaze stayed fixed on the door, ears angled, body alert even as his breathing stayed calm. Elias stayed where he was for a long time. No one spoke. The fire burned lower. The wind softened, then surged again. In the quiet, something settled between them. Not trust, not understanding. Recognition. Two bodies listening to the same night. No one said what the dog had once been. No one needed to. The rhythm remained. Morning came in thin layers. Grey light slid through the trees and settled against the cabin walls like it was listening. Elias woke with the familiar ache in his chest, dull and manageable now. The night's edge softened, but not forgotten. The fire had burned down to embers. Cold pressed back in. Harbour was already awake. He stood near the window. Weight shifted just enough to keep pressure off the bad leg, ears angled towards the forest. Not relaxed, not alarmed. Ready. Elias noticed it immediately. The dog wasn't watching the woods the way animals watched for food or weather. His focus was structured, sector by sector. Pause. Listen. Shift. Too deliberate. Elias poured coffee and let the steam warm his face. When he moved toward the door to step outside, Harbour blocked him gently, body turning sideways, eyes fixed past the glass. Elias stopped. "What is it?" he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. A sound reached them a second later. Low, distant, mechanical, not a truck, not a chainsaw exactly. Something heavier, slower. Harbour's posture changed, his tail lowered, his ears flattened back for half a second before returning forward. He glanced at Elias, then back to the trees. Elias felt the old tension tighten behind his ribs. After breakfast, he walked the tree line behind the cabin. Harbour stayed glued to his side, not wandering, not sniffing aimlessly. When Elias crouched to examine the ground, Harbour stopped moving altogether. Boot prints, not fresh from last night's snow, older, pressed deep enough to mean weight, purpose. Elias followed them until they faded into the underbrush. He straightened slowly, scanning the ridge. He didn't like it. Later that day, a pickup rolled past the access road below the cabin. It didn't stop, didn't wave. Just passed, slow enough to notice, slow enough to remember. The logo on the door was clean and new. North Timber Code. By mid-afternoon, Elias had seen two more vehicles, different plates, same route, same pause near the bend where the road dipped out of sight. Harbour tracked each one without sound. When a distant engine backfired, Harbour flinched hard enough to stumble. He caught himself immediately, shaking it off, but the reaction stayed with Elias. That wasn't fear, Elias thought. That was memory. The knock came just before sunset. 3 firm raps, not friendly, not aggressive. Elias opened the door halfway. Deputy Mark Collins stood on the porch, hat pulled low, breath fogging the air. Mid-40s? Local? The kind of man who knew every dirt road and who lived where his boots took him. "Evening, Elias," Collins said. "Heard you picked up a dog." Elias didn't answer right away. Harbour moved forward, positioning himself between Elias and the door without growling, without baring teeth. Collins noticed. "Looks rough," he said. "Dog." "He's with me," Elias replied. Collins nodded once, eyes drifting toward the trees. "You might want to keep him close." "For what reason?" Collins hesitated. "Just a fraction." "Enough. Company's been busy up the ridge," he said. North Timber's expanding their survey work, brings outsiders, equipment, folks who don't know the land. And that concerns me because... Collins shifted his weight. Because they don't like surprises. And you've been out walking. Harbour pressed closer to Elias's leg. Collins glanced down at him again. Something unreadable crossed his face. Just thought you should know. Collins said, Sometimes it's easier to mind your own business. Elias met his gaze. I always do. Collins tipped his hat. Good. He left without another word. That night the forest felt tighter. Sounds carried farther. The wind brought with it the faint smell of fuel. Harbour did not settle. He stayed awake long after Elias lay down, eyes tracking shadows, body aligned with the door. When Elias shifted in his sleep, Harbour shifted too. By morning, Elias knew what he was being asked without anyone saying it. Walk away. Let the trucks pass. Let the woods change. Let the dog be someone else's problem. It would have been easier. He stood on the porch, coffee cooling in his hand, Harbour leaning against his leg, solid and unyielding. Elias exhaled slowly. Leaving would have been easier, he said quietly. Harbour did not move. The dog had already chosen, and Elias understood that whatever was coming next, it would not let either of them go quietly. The morning Harbour chose the path, Elias did not question it. They had walked these woods enough times now that Elias could tell the difference between wandering and purpose. This was purpose. Harbour did not sniff aimlessly or pause to listen for small animals. He moved straight ahead, angling uphill, favouring his bad leg without slowing. Elias followed. The forest thinned as they climbed. Snow lay in uneven patches where the sun never reached, hard and grey with age. The air grew sharper, thinner. Elias felt it in his chest but kept moving. Harbour stopped at the edge of a narrow ravine. Not deep, just hidden. The kind of place people passed without noticing because nothing invited them in. Harbour stepped down first, careful, testing each foothold as if he already knew where it would hold. Elias climbed after him, boots sliding slightly on rock glazed with ice. At the bottom, the air smelled different. Old metal. Cold earth. Harbour moved to the left wall and paused. He lifted his nose, then turned his head back toward Elias. Not urging. Not asking. Showing. Elias brushed snow aside with his glove. His fingers struck something solid beneath. He cleared more, slower now. A fragment of casing, scorched, bent. He picked it up and felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't hunting gear, wasn't civilian. The markings were faint but familiar in a way that settled deep and heavy. Harbour had already moved on. He crossed the ravine to a cluster of rocks half buried under snow and began scraping. His movements were methodical, practiced, not frantic, not curious. Elias knelt and helped. They uncovered a strip of fabric frozen stiff with age, torn, burned at the edges. Elias stared at it longer than he meant to. North Shore 12. The words were faded, but the shape of them hit him harder than any sound. He felt it in his chest, a dull pressure spreading outward. That was shut down, he murmured. Buried. Harbour froze at the sound of the name. His ears lifted. His body went still. Elias didn't need confirmation beyond that. He sat back on his heels, breath fogging the air. Images surfaced without order. Briefings that ended early. Equipment pulled without explanation. Men sent home with silence instead of answers. He looked at Harbour then. Really looked. The scars made sense now. The discipline. The way the dog never waited for permission to protect. You weren't made, Elias said quietly. You were left. Harbour stepped closer, pressing his shoulder against Elias's knee. The contact was gentle, grounding. Elias felt his throat tighten. They're not, after what you know, he continued. "They're after the fact that you remember." Harbour held still. The wind moved through the ravine, low and steady. Snow slid off a rock face with a soft hiss. Elias bowed his head. The weight of it settled slowly, not crashing down, just heavy enough to bend him. "There are missions," he said, voice rough, "that don't end when someone says they're over." His hand rested on Harbour's neck. The fur was coarse there, uneven from old burns. "You survived," Elias whispered, "and that made you inconvenient." Harbour exhaled softly, a long breath that seemed to carry more than air. Elias wiped his face with the back of his glove. The tears came quietly, without warning, without release. They did not fall fast. They stayed, blurring the edges of the world. He stayed there like that for a long moment, man and dog, survivor and witness. No explanations were offered, none were needed. When Elias finally stood, his legs felt unsteady, but his resolve did not. He gathered the fragments carefully, tucking them away not as evidence, but as truth. Harbour turned back toward the path they had taken, waiting. Elias followed, chest aching, eyes burning, understanding fully now what had been hunting them. Not data, not secrets, memory. And memory, once it chose to stay alive, did not go quietly. The change did not come with sirens. It came quietly, the way things did when they were already overdue. Elias did not call the sheriff. He did not go to the local office. He drove 2 hours south instead, to a federal building that still smelled like old paper and burned coffee. Harbour stayed in the truck, watching the doors, listening. Inside, Elias spoke to a woman who did not interrupt. She wore no uniform, just a badge clipped low on her belt. She looked at the fragments Elias placed on the table without touching them at first. The fabric, the casing, the scorched metal. Her jaw tightened. "North Shore 12. She said softly. I wondered when that ghost would surface again. She did not ask Elias where he found them. She did not ask why he still remembered the name. She asked one question only. "Is the dog alive?" Elias nodded. The woman closed the folder she had not opened yet. Then she stood. "We will take it from here. The first crack inside North Timber did not come from a raid. It came from a man who stopped sleeping. His name was Daniel Reeve, a field engineer, mid-50s, divorced, quiet. The kind of man who had followed orders long enough to forget when they stopped making sense. When federal agents asked him about North Shore, he denied it twice. On the third question, his voice failed him. He asked for water. He asked if the dog was still alive. That was when he told them everything. The unauthorized continuation of the project, the buried equipment, the directive to erase physical traces, not records. He said the word erase like it tasted bad. He did not ask for immunity. He did not ask for a deal. He asked only one thing. Tell him I am sorry. He did not say who. Within a week, the truck stopped coming up the ridge. Survey flags disappeared. Equipment vanished overnight. North Timber issued a statement about restructuring and unforeseen liabilities. No apologies, no explanations. People in town noticed only that the road grew quiet again. Deputy Mark Collins drove by Elias's cabin one evening and stopped this time. They stood on the porch without shaking hands. Looks like they pulled out. Collins said, "Looks like." Collins glanced at Harbour, who lay at Elias's feet, alert but calm. The dog's eyes followed the tree line out of habit now, not fear. Some things should have stayed buried. Collins said. Elias met his gaze. Some things should not have been buried alive. Collins nodded once. That was all. No headlines followed, no ceremonies, no medals. North Timber folded its regional operations 6 months later, under regulatory pressure that never made the evening news. A few executives retired early, a few careers ended quietly. No one knocked on Elias's door to thank him. He did not expect them to. That night, Elias sat on the porch with Harbour beside him. The wind moved through the trees the way it used to, without engines cutting through it. Elias rested his hand on the dog's back. Harbour leaned into it, steady and warm. For the first time since the flea market, the forest felt like itself again. No one was punished loudly. But something was finally right. Spring arrived without asking permission. The snow pulled back in slow retreat, leaving behind dark soil and thin veins of water that cut through the ground like fresh breath. A season passed, then another, until the mountains softened and the air carried the smell of pine instead of ice. Harbour aged quietly. The limp in his leg never left. Some mornings it was worse, stiff and stubborn, forcing him to take his time on the porch steps Elias had rebuilt wider and lower. Elias never rushed him. He had learned the value of waiting. The dog's muzzle grayed. His movements slowed, not from weakness, but from a body that had finally decided it no longer needed to be ready for everything. Elias changed too. The tightness in his chest came less often now. When it did, he knew how to manage it. He kept his medication where it belonged. He slept through most nights without waking to ghosts. The cabin bore the marks of hands that stayed. A new beam braced the roof where winter storms once crept in. The radio crackled cleanly again, voices traveling across distances without distortion. The woodpile stayed full. In the mornings, Elias brewed coffee and stepped out onto the porch while the fog still hung low between the trees. Harbour followed, settling at his feet, the boards warm beneath them. They watched the day arrive together. No one spoke of what had happened. The ridge remained quiet. No trucks, no survey tape. Just birds testing the air and wind moving through branches the way it always had. People in town nodded when Elias passed now. Some knew about the dog. Some didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was the staying. Harbour slept more, dreamed less. Elias fixed what needed fixing. Let the rest be. On certain mornings, when the light hit just right and the coffee steamed in his hands, Elias felt something he had not allowed himself to name before. Peace. It did not arrive all at once. It did not announce itself. It stayed. And so did they. The story did not spread the way headlines did. It moved slowly, through conversations that lingered after they should have ended, through names mentioned twice, then remembered. It started with the veterans. A man from Twin Falls stopped Elias at the hardware store one afternoon, eyes drifting to Harbour lying patiently in the shade. "That him?" the man asked, not curious, certain. Elias nodded once. The man crouched with effort, resting his weight on his heels. He didn't reach out. He just looked at Harbour for a long moment. "Good," he said finally. Someone stayed. After that, others came by the cabin. Not in groups, one at a time. Men who spoke little and listened well. Some brought coffee. One brought a bag of dog treats Harbour politely ignored. They did not ask questions. They did not need answers. They left lighter than they arrived. At the elementary school down the road, a teacher told the story during a lesson about community. Not the danger, not the company. Just the part where no one wanted the dog and someone took him home anyway. Children drew pictures, a dog with one cloudy eye, a man with a beard on a porch, mountains that looked too big for paper. At the animal shelter, a volunteer taped a handwritten note near the kennels. He stayed. Adoptions rose quietly that spring. No campaign, no fundraiser, just a few more empty cages than usual. People began to recognize Harbour, not as a hero, not as a miracle, as a reminder. They saw him limping beside Elias through town, saw how Elias slowed to match him, saw how the dog watched doors, roads, faces, how he never begged, never turned away. Someone once asked Elias if Harbour had saved lives. Elias thought for a moment before answering. He made it harder to walk away, he said. That seemed to be enough. The mountains held their silence. The cabin held its warmth. Harbour slept in the sun on the porch, chest rising and falling steady as ever. Children waved from passing cars. Veterans tipped their hats. No statues were built, no plaques hung. But when people told the story, they always ended the same way. Not with what Harbour had done, but with what he made others do instead. He became the reason they stayed. Dawn came quietly, the way it always did up here. The sky shifted from dark to pale without drama, the mountains slowly separating themselves from shadow. Elias stood on the porch with a mug warming his hands, breath steady, shoulders loose. The cold no longer felt like an enemy, just a fact of place. Harbour lay beside him. He did not rise when the light changed. He lifted his head instead, watching the ridge as if checking in with something old and familiar. His body was slower now, his breathing deeper. The limp was there, pronounced in the mornings, but it did not seem to bother him. Elias adjusted his stance so his leg brushed Harbour's side. They stayed like that for a long while. No talk of what had been lost, no talk of what might come next. Just the sound of birds testing the air and wind moving through trees that had seen far worse than either of them. Elias thought about the morning at the flea market, about how close he had come to leaving, about how small the decision had felt at the time. $5, one turn back. He looked down at Harbour, who had settled his chin against the porch boards, eyes half closed, listening. Funny thing, Elias said quietly. Harbour's ear twitched. Turns out we both just needed someone to stay. The sun cleared the ridge, spilling light across the valley. The cabin caught it full on, wood glowing warm and familiar. Harbour closed his eyes completely now, satisfied, present. Elias finished his coffee and did not rush to refill it. The mountains stood where they always had. And for once, so did he. Many people who hear stories like this say it reminds them of someone they once knew. Who did this story remind you of?